So guys, before we proceed any further in this course, it is important that we understand and make ourselves familiar with the concept of object network. So this is a very small topic. We will just spend one video on that. So object network is nothing but it is just a precise way to represent a set of IP addresses. Set of IP addresses can be represented in three ways. For example, the collection of individual IP addresses. For example, 1.1.1 or 4.4.3.2, etc., etc. So collection of individual IP addresses, which are just random IP addresses. This is one way to represent a collection or set of IP addresses. The second way to represent the collection of IP addresses is using a subnet. All right. So this subnet means that all the IP addresses which belongs to this range. All right. So subnet is one way to represent the collection of IP addresses. And the third way is simply represent the set of IP addresses using a contiguous range. For example, this is a set of IP addresses which belongs to this range 222.10 to 222.20. That is, 10 IP addresses are there in this range. All right. So object networks are used to represent collection of addresses using exactly one of the above technique. All right. So note the word using exactly one of the above technique. We create an object network to represent the collection of IP addresses, and those IP addresses can be represented by any one of these three techniques. All right. And object networks are actually named entities. You have to provide some name to these object networks. So we will going to discuss the example how to configure object networks and how they help us to manage the configuration on the device. So object networks simplify the configuration where we need to specify set of IP addresses on which some common rule need to be applied. All right. So we will going to use object networks extensively in access control list or in network address translation rules. Since this part of the course is dedicated to network translation rules, therefore it was important for us to get ourselves familiarized with the object networks. So let us discuss how we use object networks in our day-to-day configuration. On the screen, you can see a typical topology, right? Here in the middle is a firewall, and on the left-hand side is an intranet which belongs to the XYZ Corporation. All right, so this is the personal intranet of XYZ Corporation, and XYZ Corporation has installed a firewall on its boundary of the intranet, and the outside part of this firewall is connected to an open internet. And on the open internet, there are public servers or public machines or public users. Now, it is a requirement of XYZ Corporation that XYZ Corporation don't want any of its internal users which are present in the subnet 10.0.0/24. That is, user 1 and user 2 are the two users which are present in this subnet. Remember, there could be thousands of users in the same subnet. For the sake of example, I have chosen a subnet 10.0.0/24, and for the sake of example, I am showing the user 1 and user 2 as two users which are present in this subnet. So XYZ Corporation do not want any of its internal users which is present in this subnet to communicate outside the local subnet. All right. So let 10.0.0/24 is a subnet which is being used by all the users which belong to HR department of the organization. So user 1 and user 2, these are the users who are the part of HR department of the organization. And the subnet 10.0.0/24 is a subnet which is dedicated to HR department of the organization. All right. So it is a requirement of XYZ Corporation that it doesn't want any of its users who are the members of HR department to communicate with any users which is present outside its local subnet. That is, XYZ Corporation just want the users of the HR department to communicate with each other, that is within the same subnet, but it doesn't want any of the users in the HR department to communicate with any users who is either present on the internet or any users who is present, who is a member of any other department within the organization. All right. So how object networks can help achieve this objective? So actually this objective can be easily achieved by access control list, but access control list has to make use of object networks. So as a part of configuration, first of all, the user will going to create an object network called HR department. As I said, object networks are named entities. So HR department is actually a name of the object network that we are creating. And remember, this configuration is being done on this firewall. All right. And as I said, object network is a collection of IP addresses. So here the user is specifying the collection of IP addresses using subnet. All right. So here the user is specifying the subnet which belongs or which is dedicated to HR department, which is 10.0.0.0/24. All right. So all the users who belong to the HR department would fall in this subnet. We already know that. All right. So the administrator has created an object network whose name is HR department, and he has added the collection of IP addresses using subnet keyword to this object network. As simple as that. Now, as the second step, the user will going to create an access list on this ASA firewall. Now, I understand that you don't know what is access list, or you don't know, you may not be familiar with the access list, but this example I have covered only to demonstrate the use of object networks. We will going to study access list separately. So here the user is creating an access list and he is giving a meaningful name to this access list called block all. So it can be any string. And he's saying that any packet which is an IPv4 packet whose source address belongs to this HR department. Source address in the packet belongs to this HR department subnet. So the source address could be any address which belongs to this subnet range. It could be 10.0.0.1, it could be 10.0.0.20, and etc. And the destination IP address in this IP packet could be anything, I don't care. So first of all, the packet has to be an IPv4. The source address of the packet has to be an address which belongs to this HR department, and the destination address of the packet could be anything, I don't care. All right. If such a packet is encountered, then I am attaching the fate of this packet, and the fate of this packet is reject or deny. All right. So this is the meaning of this access control list. Now again, you don't have to go in very much detail into this access control list because it is a subject that we will going to discuss separately. Now as a second step, the user is attaching this access control list on the inside interface of the firewall, that is on this interface. So it means that any packet which ingress on this inside interface of this firewall would be evaluated against this access list. And if this packet satisfies the following three constraints of this access list, that is, the packet should be IP packet, the source address must belong to the HR department, and the destination address could be anything, then the packet would be rejected or dropped by the ASA firewall. All right. So it simply means that any packet whose source address belongs to this HR department, when try to exit out of this ASA firewall on its inside interface, the packet would be dropped by this access list. As simple as that. So it indirectly translates to that any packet which is generated by any of the users in the HR department cannot leave its local subnet or cannot go out of its local subnet. The users can communicate with each other internally because the packet need not go to firewall in order to allow for the user to communicate with each other internally. But as soon as any of the internal users of the HR department wants to communicate with any other user, which is outside the HR department, then the packet has to go to the inside interface of the HR of this firewall. And as per the access control list, the packet will be dropped. All right. So the takeaway from all this discussion is that here you can see how object networks is cleverly used in this access control list. Similarly, you can configure various network address translation rules which make use of object networks, and that is something that we will going to cover in this course. Through this example, I just want to convey how object networks can be created by the user and how various rules such as network address translation rules or access list can be configured by the user, which indirectly make use of object networks.